Well, good morning, Northview. How are you guys doing this morning? All right. These guys are the most bushy-eyed, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to go people of the whole morning. You're ready. You're caffeinated. You're slept in as long as it's allowable on a day like today. This is third service for those of you guys that thought you were at second. But we're so glad that you could be with us. Everybody that joined us at home, we're glad you could be connecting with us as well. What a great, Eric said it, what a great few days it's been around here. The men's conference, I think I'm still riding a high from that. Really, really cool. Some of the evidence behind us that ties to the theme of what we were talking through yesterday and Friday. The pie auction last Sunday. If you didn't hear this, over $90,000 was raised. Unbelievable. All of that going to reduce the cost of camp for students by hundreds of dollars, making it more accessible and more likely that more students go and that more people have an opportunity to hear about the good news of Jesus. We're so thrilled for that. We are really in the heart of this series that we've been in for the last several weeks called Learning Curve, where we've been looking into some of the deep questions that Jesus asked, and answering them requires really some life change and some movement, some reflection. And this question today, I think, is the biggest question of the whole thing, of the whole series. It's in the middle for a reason. Today kind of marks where, as we go through these questions, we start to shift towards the final week of Jesus's life and ministry. This is kind of the fulcrum week that kind of points us down towards that road. And, when I say life's biggest question, that's a big statement, right? Because there are a lot of questions in life that are really big and really important to nail down and get an answer to. I mean, like the origin question is a big question. Where did I come from? Where did I come from? The purpose question is a big question. What is my life's purpose? What am I here for? The identity question, who am I? Or the morality question, how should I live? Or the destiny question, where is my life heading? All of those are important. All of those are huge questions. And some people are living life without asking the important questions. I think it's valuable to ask the important questions so that the trajectory of your life is on the right path. But there is a question that we're going to talk about today that I think the answer to brings clarity to all those other questions we just talked about. All of those other big life questions are connected to this. So we're going to go to Luke chapter 9. If you have a Bible, turn there. If you have a Bible app on your phone, turn to Luke 9. That'll work as well. This is taking place on the heels of the story we looked at last week, which was the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus' popularity is really high and on multiple fronts. I mean, he's got a lot of people that love him. He has a lot of people that don't like him. He's enough of a threat at this point to other religious leaders that they're starting to go, hey, this guy's kind of a problem. We might need to be thinking about how we're going to get him out of here, get him off the scene. This will ultimately lead to the plot that puts him on a cross. But there's also tons of interest in him and connection to him, and that makes sense because he's doing things like miracles, healings, teaching in such a powerful and persuasive way that people are coming seemingly out of the woodwork to kind of connect with him and hear what he has to say. And so this story all takes place on the heels of that miracle, on the heels of all this popularity. It's a more private moment with him and his disciples. Luke 9:18 says, once when Jesus was praying in private, his disciples were with him, and he asked them, who do the crowds say that I am? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others that one of the prophets long ago has come back to life. Well, but what about you? He asked. Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, you are God's Messiah. You are God's Messiah. Some translations will say the Christ. You are the Christ. And Peter's answer is it's an extraordinary answer. His fuller answer is in Matthew 16:16, where he says, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That statement is encompassing of all kinds of theological conviction. I believe you are the one that God has sent into the world to deliver us as a people. I believe that you are the one who has come to redeem and restore and renew. I believe that you are physically in the body, the embodiment of God. I am counting on you as my Lord and as my leader. There's a lot in that statement. It is beautiful. It is succinct. Let me ask this. Why is it so hard to say that? Why is it so hard to give that answer? I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And I don't mean like it's hard to say, it's easy to recite words, but I mean, why is it so hard for us? Why is it so hard for people to say, my answer to the question, who is Jesus, is, I believe he's the Son of God. I believe he's the Son of God. I think it's because there are so many barriers that you have to overcome to get there. There's so many barriers that you have to overcome. Anybody who's ever answered that question, including Peter, had to overcome a number of barriers. Your journey, you've had to overcome them. Maybe you're still trying to overcome some. Anyone who you know, who you would love to see take a step of faith towards Jesus will have to overcome some barriers to be able to declare emphatically, I believe this is the Son of God, my Lord, my Savior. What I'd like to do today is talk about what those primary barriers are and address them and show how Jesus offers a hand to anyone who's trying to overcome or struggling to overcome and personally has solved the struggle. The first barrier is a barrier in the mind. It's a mental barrier. For many, it's a mental barrier. I can't make this make sense. This doesn't make sense. The idea that there was a man born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, died a substitutionary death, was raised on the third day. There is something mentally incongruent in my mind. I can't get there. I can't connect that. I can't embrace that. Often people have said that and then very quickly dismissed so that because I don't understand it or because it doesn't make sense, I just move on and I just kind of flush it and don't worry about it. But I don't think that's a fair way to treat the subject matter, because I think it would be better than to say, it just doesn't make sense, to say, it doesn't make sense to me right now. That would be a more honest answer. Because there's a lot of things that don't make sense to me right now that does make sense to other people. And in time, it could make sense to me. If I was willing to investigate, if I was willing to pour into that. Like, let me tell you about a guilty pleasure that I have. And when I do this, it's only if I know no one's going to argue with me, no one's going to draw any attention to this. So it's usually when I'm at home by myself and no one's going to talk to me about what I'm watching. But I've got a guilty pleasure on YouTube called Vice Grip Garage that I like to watch. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you're welcome. But I have one person, my son Drew, who loves to watch this with me. This is long-form YouTube, not shorts. I'm talking like an hour, hour and a half, 2.5 hour long episodes. Like incredibly long, not perfectly produced, raw. But I can't take my eyes off it. For one, the host, it's a one-man show. He is hilarious. He is witty, he's got nicknames for stuff, and it just draws me in and makes me just giggle for 2 hours when I'm watching him. But his whole shtick is that he goes to somebody's house, to their yard car, or their barn car, or their field car that's been sitting for 25 years untouched, not being driven, and he brings it back to life from the field and drives it out of the field it's been sitting in for 20 years and right past the owner's house who said it'll never run again, and then gets on the road and drives it like 400 miles back to Tennessee where he lives and details the whole journey and all the things that kept breaking down and how he solved every problem along the way. There's some guys right now that are just like, that's steak. They smell steak as I just described that. You're going to be watching it while I'm preaching right now. You know, like you're like, you're done. I'm checked out. Like, I know there are episodes on episodes, fellas. Like, oh my gosh, it's so fun. I got Jeff hooked. It's bad. It's a bad thing. But full confessional, I am like a nominal car guy. And that's part of why I'm drawn into this. Because it is the ultimate man flex to be able to go, that car that's in that barn for 30 years, I guarantee you I will have this thing driven out of here. I mean, it's just, I can't even fathom the wisdom, the knowledge. And so he's tinkering and explaining, and this is what we got to do. And I'm like, of course that's what we got to do we? I don't know. What is that? What does that do? And so it's possible for me to say, it doesn't make sense what he's doing. But it's impossible for me to say that total, like in a concrete way, that it is not making sense at all to anyone anywhere. It clearly makes sense to him. And it clearly works. Like his path is verifiable. Like I can watch him and know, I don't know what you're doing, but if you can back it out of that garage and drive it home, I guess what you're doing was the right thing. What I'm here to say is it's the same way with faith and overcoming the barrier of the mind. There are evidences that are there that even though you might not understand them initially, they are there, and in time you can see them, you can observe them, you can test them, you can walk through them, and you can start to see a demonstrated pattern where if you apply them, they drive, they work. There's something there. Jesus would invite people to look at him and go, if you don't want to believe in what I'm saying, at least trust the miracles. At least trust that when you see this feeding of the 5,000, that you would understand that what I'm saying is true because I could do something like that. To overcome a mental barrier, you have to overcome and think through, what are my presuppositions? What is my starting point? For some of us, the starting point is people that we care deeply about who had very antagonistic or agnostic thoughts about God. And so when we start to think about the idea of pursuing Jesus as Lord of our life, we have to go, but my dad hated this conversation, wouldn't have this conversation, didn't want any part of it. I love my dad. Am I somehow now disloyal, or do I have... Maybe it's a struggle that's not just presuppositions, but maybe it's just intellectual doubt. There's too much confusion, too much difficulty to comprehend. What if I told you that we're living in a day where there's never been more opportunity to access on a very approachable level the evidences that do exist and allow them to speak into your life? I mean, guys like Lee Strobel, who was an atheist, whose wife decided to become a Christian. He was a journalist for Chicago Tribune. His wife decides to become a Christian. He's like, fine, that's your world, not mine. And then she said, I'd like to give to the church. And he said, now that's my world. Now you're messing with my world. And so he said, I'm going to turn my journalistic skills loose, and I'm going to prove to my wife that Christianity is a joke. And so he investigates the evidence like he'd been trained to do as a journalistic reporter. And he found that the evidence pointed him to Jesus and the reality that it happened, and the eyewitnesses, and so he becomes one of the foremost experts on apologetics and helping people in everyday life be able to approach some of the thought processes that led him to believe that what happened and what's told in the Bible actually happened. He wrote a book, The Case for Christ. Or J. Warner Wallace, who had a similar type thing happen. He was a homicide detective. And he was not a believer. But when he began to start to think about this idea of the faith, he said, I'm going to turn loose my skills as a homicide detective. If Jesus was crucified on a cross, let's treat that as a crime scene. An innocent man put on a cross, we'll treat it as a crime scene, and we'll see where the evidence leads. Where did it lead? That Jesus is Lord. And see, when it comes to the evidences, you'll always have questions, but there's something there that you can't ignore. And what I've tried to learn myself, and I've tried to coach others to do, is when you start to encounter doubts intellectually or the mental barrier to saying yes to Jesus as Lord, you have to let what's undeniable overshadow what's unexplainable. There are always things that won't totally make sense. Jesus' disciples, his own disciples said, it's unexplainable that you are alive after you were dead on Friday. I don't have an explanation for that, but I can't deny that you're here with me right now. There is evidences that can pull you over. Jesus said in Matthew 7:7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. One aspect as you think about the mental barriers that keep people from Jesus is this. Don't ever forget that this story that we just read and all the ones that are contained in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they are written by eyewitnesses. They're not just telling a story. They've watched something happen. They've witnessed something happen, and they're recording it. How much testimony in a court of law from one good eyewitness does it take to convict somebody of anything? We have eyewitness testimony helping us overcome the mental barriers. For some, the issue is not mental, though. It's emotional. It's emotional barriers. It's something that's affecting them more on the inside where it doesn't feel safe, this idea that you could trust God. And this is tied to our human nature. When you're wounded, you learn. You touch something hot and you go, ouch, don't do that again. And so this faith conversation for a lot of people who have been hurt in life, specifically by people who said, I am a follower of Jesus. They say, ouch, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going there. I've been wounded by somebody who said they were a follower, or God allowed that wounding to happen. He didn't stop it from happening, this evil that happened to me. We look at that situation, or we look at imperfect people. What Jesus invites us to do is to come upstream. Rather than look downstream at some polluted waters, but to look upstream to the source. Sinless, without fault. And not only that, but one who has lived and placed himself in our world and lived in our shoes to the degree that he's experienced what we've experienced. This is one of the greatest, I think, ways to overcome some of this heart stuff is to realize he's not asking you to hold on and to hang on in a world that he hasn't lived in. He knows the pain of abandonment. He knows the struggle. He knows the difficulties. He knows what it's like to feel all alone. He cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yes, because he was quoting Psalm 22, which is an incredible prediction of the crucifixion, 1,000 years before crucifixion was even invented. But also, yes, because he was absolutely miserable and felt alone in that moment. But he hung on that cross so that he could take all the pains of all the world for all of time that everybody had experienced, so that he could defeat it, so that he could knock the teeth out of the sting of death. And he could kick down the door of eternity so that what was once broken could have time to be restored. One of the great promises that Jesus offers those who follow him is that what you have felt in this life is not all there is to feel. There's more to come. And if you believe eternity is real, if you believe that Jesus is Lord, you believe that there is still time to heal. There's still time. Sometimes we experience something so painful and it starts to set this picture in our mind of who God is and what he is all about. As if that is a done deal and there's nothing more to say about it. But if eternity is real, if Jesus is Lord, if the resurrection happened, there's still time to rewrite and to undo all the pain that you and I have experienced. There's still time to fix. There's still time to understand God as a father. I had years ago a conversation with a guy named Travis who was coming to my church, and Travis, he was an atheist to agnostic, somewhere on that spectrum, and he came only because his wife came. He was only trying to placate his wife. And so he would engage with me after service in conversations, and often they were a bit combative. He was really there was a good version of it, as close to the edge as you could get with it being the wrong version of it. But we would go over a period of time, and if Travis was coming, I was like, okay, buckle up. Here comes 10 minutes. Here's a deep question. And we would go and we would talk, and I tried to share everything I knew how to possibly share. And then one day, Travis comes forward and he goes, I'm ready. And I'm like, what? Like, why now? Like, why all of a sudden? And he goes, well, I was holding my little baby. They just had their first child. And he said, I was just holding him one night, and I was just thinking, man, if I love my kid this much, how much more must God love me? There was something emotional that he was struggling to overcome, something that had happened to him years and years and years before that had taken his view of God and kind of put it in a blender. And he was having a hard time understanding what it was, but he finally saw a demonstration of the perfect love of God in the person of Jesus, who is the image, he is the picture, he is what we can know about God, and said, yeah, he did that for me because he loves me and because he's willing to do whatever it took to make sure all that pain could be undone in the end. The last barrier that I want to talk about is a will barrier. It's a barrier of the will. This is what keeps us from God so frequently. Because we are, as human beings, stubborn people. And we will not go down without a fight. And when you say Jesus is Lord, when you say your kingdom come, you are saying my kingdom done. And that's hard to say. That's hard to you're surrendering. You're laying down the battle. And that's not easy to do. To follow Jesus as Lord requires a change. No more excuses. It's a new direction. Things like pride keeps us from that. Control, a desire for control, or apathy. Pride says, I'm not willing to say I was wrong or I'm sorry. Control says, I'm not willing to let go of the wheel. I have no interest in doing that. Apathy says, I have just no interest. All of these become a battle between us. I watched all these battles being fought this weekend with a group of guys that were in this room. And, you know, maybe of all the battles that were being fought, it was the battle of the will. We polled our guys at one point because they were challenged to create a list of the things that they would stop doing, and the things that they would start doing. What is God calling you to stop? What is God calling you to start? These guys also kind of spoke into it. I just read, there's an anonymous poll. The number one thing to stop doing was stop making excuses. Stop making excuses. Number one, was to start leading the family. Stop making excuses, start leading the family. More than any other thing in this room, that's what was convicting people. That's a battle of the will. Specifically when there's a brokenness that's out there. Men don't need to know that something's off or broken in their family. They know, but they'd rather watch Vice Grip Garage than go deal with the real thing, the real issue. They'd rather go tinker in the garage. They'd rather go do something where they have like a possibility that it might end right at the end rather than a possibility that it would end wrong at the end. And these guys were just shaken up after service this morning. 2 guys within 5 minutes came up to me. One said, I left the conference yesterday and I drove 200 miles to see my son. I don't even know what he said. I don't need to know what he said. I know what he said. There was another guy last service, right after that. He was coming to the second service. And he said, 7 o'clock last night, I called my son. I didn't know what he meant, but I knew what he meant. It's a representation of the battle of will. And if that's how a dad and a son can battle sometimes, how much more can a God and his child battle? We battle. And we fight. And we hold things We don't want to relent, and we don't want to let go because we're happy where we are, or we're convinced we can win the fight, and that's hilarious, but we think we can. Human wills don't change easily. They change when a handful of things happen. Number one, when pain gets to a level that's so great that you're finally willing to change. A lot of people come to God after a long, drawn out fight. It could have been a lot easier, but they're going to ride that ride to the very end. They're going to inflict maximum pain on themselves and potentially people around them before they come to that point. But sometimes, finally, people come to the end of themselves and they go, I could have learned this 100 different ways that would have been easier, but if my way was going to work, it would have worked by now, and they finally surrender. The second way is when the value proposition makes sense in their mind that what they're leaving is so much less valuable than what they're going to. It's the parable of the treasure in the field. You would sell everything you have, the pearl of great price. You would sell everything you have to have that one piece of property with the buried treasure in it, with that pearl of great price. It's an exchange. It's like, I have something of no value, something of great value. You're telling me I can switch them? Yes, I'm doing it. The third way is by force. When you understand that the sheer magnitude of force that you are fighting is so much bigger and stronger than who you are. Listen, if the resurrection happened, and we've got 4 eyewitness testimonies who contain multiple more eyewitness testimonies, over 515 in total people that the Bible says saw Jesus resurrected. If that happened, Jesus has been anointed with an authority that is so beyond you and so insurmountable that your attempt to fight him or to battle against him will only lose every time. Philippians says that God, because of the cross and the resurrection, God has elevated him to the highest place of honor. He gave him the name above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That's a prediction of the end of time. Every knee will bow, whether willingly or by force. There is a tidal wave of authority connected to the person of Jesus. He created this whole world by speaking it into existence. He can stop storms by saying something to them. He can turn water into wine. He can walk on water. Peter got to a point in his life where he said, if I believe and saw and witnessed you can do that, I am not fighting you any longer. You are my leader. You are the chosen one. You are the one. Everything I have, everything in my life, I'm banking it on you. So I come back to the question, what about you? Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Jesus is supremely interested in your answer to that question. My answer to that question won't do anything for you. Peter answered it, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. His answer means nothing for me or you. Your grandma's answer to the question doesn't do anything. Your parents' answer to the question doesn't mean anything to you. You have to answer this question. This is the most important question in life. Who do you believe Jesus to be? C.S. Lewis years ago famously said this about this question. There are only 3 possible answers. There's only 3 possible answers to the question, who is Jesus? He's either a liar and everything he said is false, a lunatic that should be dismissed and never listened to, or Lord of all. There's no other possible answer. If you're to treat Jesus on his terms by reading the stories of his life and his ministry, to listen to his teachings, there is no way that you can come to the conclusion that many have about Jesus of, hey, I like his teaching. Hey, he was a nice guy. Hey, he was a revolutionary for his time. But that means nothing for me. It's incongruent. You can't come to that conclusion. That's impossible to be a legitimate, serious answer. He's a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's Lord. Who do you say that he is? For 2,000 years, Peter's statement, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, has been ringing out into humanity, ringing out into eternity. We most frequently hear those words said in the waters of baptism. Whenever someone's in those waters, we have them repeat these words, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And as they stand there in those waters, that is a moment where they are saying, what God has done in me, I am proclaiming for the world to see. I'm not ashamed of him. I will bank my life on him. He died for me. I love him because he loved me first, and nothing else matters in my life more than this. Are you ready to take that step? Can you say that emphatically about your belief and your understanding of Jesus? He is my Lord. He is my Savior. I know there's barriers. I know there's struggles. I know hard things, it's hard to understand at times. It's hard in our hearts to make sense of it. But there is a tidal wave of evidence and authority that's circling around the idea that we cannot deny that God sent his Son, Jesus, to this earth on your behalf to save you, to rescue you, and to bring you to a point where you could declare, you're my Lord. You're my Savior. If you're ready to take that step today as we worship, I'll be standing in the back. I'd love to meet with you. I'd love to pray with you, help you take that step and acknowledge Jesus is Lord. Everything changes after that. You surrender to him. You die to yourself. And a new life that you never knew even existed is out there in front of you to live. Bigger and grander and greater than anything you could have come up with on your own. Step into that reality and experience that life change. It's found only one place, in Jesus, and Jesus alone. Will you stand with me? Will you pray?